Hello and welcome to the Metagame. Now, this is the web series where we talk about board games and sometimes talk about talking about board games and also unplug our microphone from our computer just before we start streaming. So I need to make sure that everyone can hear me before I continue on to make sure that I got the microphone plugged back in correctly. Perfect. Thank you very much for the acknowledgement that the audio is working. Oops, hang on. There we go. In case there was an echo, that should have resolved any echo issues that we have. So we're off to a great start today, and here I was all prepped and ready to go. But now that we're all here and we can all hear each other, I want to take a moment to introduce myself because this is going to be kind of an interesting episode, I think. My name is Chaz Marler. And for the last 2.5 years or so, I've been running a YouTube channel about board games called Pair of Dice Paradise, and been releasing videos on a regular basis on that channel. And I'm also a contributor with the Dice Tower's Board Game Breakfast. And this year, in January, as part of this year's Dice Tower Kickstarter, Tom was generous enough to actually add me as one of the stretch goals. So that I'm actually producing videos directly for the Dice Tower's YouTube channel as one of the actual Dice Tower official contributors, I guess, in that capacity. So that started this year. And then this year wasn't exciting enough. In March, I began working actually in official capacity with Passport Game Studios, board game publisher, as their on social media, YouTube, and customer support representative. So within the last 2.5 years, I've really become a lot more involved and directly involved with the board game industry, which is fantastic. So why am I providing this big reintroduction of myself? Well, because for today's episode, there's two things kind of that I wanted to do. The last couple of episodes have been have had a really long kind of presentation by me to begin with. I think last week's was almost a 40-minute presentation or something. So I wanted to kind of switch gears a little bit. And so this episode, I wanted to be a lot more conversational. I'm not going to talk as much up front, and hopefully we'll be talking together through the YouTube chat a lot more. Because the way that this show works is I am going to present a topic of discussion for the day, and then I'm going to turn to the live streaming YouTube chat comments as we go along. And anyone who has something that they think is relevant to the topic and would like to have it discussed on the show is welcome to add the hashtag TMG to their YouTube streaming chat. And I'll use my browser's search tool to highlight all of those hashtags. So all of the YouTube chat comments that have that hashtag in it will be kind of highlighted and easier for me to find. And I'll go through as we go through the episode, I'll go through and respond to as many of those as possible to keep our conversation going. Speaking of which, the conversation this week, like I said, is going to be kind of a two-part mix. For this week's, for my board game breakfast segment that I'm working on for next Monday, the topic I'm working on for that is my dream game. Not a grail game, not a game that exists that you've been searching for your whole life, or you played once and you're trying to remember what it was. But a dream game, a game that doesn't exist at all. But if time and money and everything was not an issue, what's the ultimate perfect game for you that you would design? And I was working on this segment, and I realized as I'm working on it, it is an excellent topic for the metagame platform as well to discuss. So I thought we'd be able to see two sides of the coin. We'll have the more polished presentation in the Board Game Breakfast episode, but here we'll be able to have the side of the coin of communication and discussion with the audience here about it, because I'm sure that we'll see some really interesting game concepts and things that we never would have thought of before. So I thought that would be really neat. Now, not everyone's going to have a game design or a dream game that they have in mind. So I thought that this would also be a really good opportunity to use this episode also as kind of just a live Q&A, ask me anything, whatever you want to call it type of episode. Been meaning to do a dedicated one of those, but topics keep coming up, and that's, those are always, it's always fun to have an actual topic to jump off of. So since the dream game topic might be kind of a lighter topic, I thought we'd also have, in addition to that, you feel free to use this hashtag right there, and right there it is, right there. Use that hashtag right there, and we will just also have a general Q&A session as well, which is why I reintroduced myself at the beginning to remind everyone of where I'm at and what changes have been happening in my life with the board game industry. When hopefully that will trigger some questions that you guys might have about that, which I would be happy to discuss. But first, before we get to that, let me share with you my concept for my dream board game. Now, before I talk about this, full disclosure, the game I'm about to describe is ridiculous, totally unfeasible, not something that I would ever expect to actually be published. But if all things were considered equal and I was able to have this game magically appear in front of me, and the timing and the situation and the players were just right, here's the game I always dream about being able to play. So my dream board game design would be just this fantastically detailed, completely overwrought combination of something like SimCity, the Sid Meier's Civilization video game, and something like Kemet. Okay? So you're building up things and then crushing other people with what you build. And again, I doubt it would be even remotely playable, but the way that these pieces would work together is, you just like Civilization, you'd start with one or two little settler meeples. Okay, you start with basically nothing in the Stone Age, and through the SimCity city building aspect, you would take that little civilization and you would build up a city or a nation with it. And I mean, like, there would be resources on the board, stone and wood and gold and iron and plastics and, shopping mall factory resources. Anyway, there'd be all these resources there would be resources on the board to collect and manage and barter and trade and stuff like that, and trade routes and everything. But the SimCity aspect is not only the city building part of it, but I'm talking about that level of city management complexity. Managing travel routes, traffic routes, trade routes and stuff, making sure that people can get from one place to the other. Even as electricity becomes available, making sure that your city or nation's power grid is set up correctly. The water and sewer system, make sure everyone has water. So that level of SimCity level planning within this board game to build up your nation. Then to make your nation unique and branch off into a unique asymmetrical citizenship. That's where kind of the Sid Meier's Civilization video game level tech tree would come into play. Something where once you build up, you get the resources or you trade for the resources and you obtain them, you can go branch off in all these different directions. So, and all the players would have something asymmetrical. So you have this huge, complex, I don't know how you would manage it, how you would keep control of everything on the board. It'd be super fiddly, stuff all over the place. It'd be ridiculous. But there's more. That's not all. Okay, so you have your nation that you build up. You have your resources you manage. You have your tech tree that you do to develop your own asymmetrical, unique units and abilities. Meanwhile, also, within your nation, you are also building up a military force, which is where kind of the Kemet aspect kind of would come into it, where you would build up this army, these units, and this military force, and then go and coerce, threaten, negotiate with, invade, and just crush your opponents with your military force. Meanwhile, all this time, all of the other players are doing this exact same thing with all of their resources and their technologies and their military units and such. And of course, like Sid Meier's Civilization, their military would not be the only path to victory, but there'd be science and cultural and other methods to victory. But the one I daydream about the most is that aspect of it, of also building up and managing the military. So basically, in a nutshell, my dream game, to summarize it in one sentence, would be building up an entire nation from scratch and then crushing your opponents with it. And I know there's been many civ building games. There's been many complex civ building games. And again, the one that I described, I know would not be feasible, but I imagine would be 10 times more complex probably than a lot of them that are out there. And we're talking plastic figures on the board, little pieces to represent everything, just totally overproduced, totally ridiculous. You'd spend an entire day or weekend, playing this whole thing. It'd be horrible. There'd be player elimination. It just breaks every design rule possible in a board game. But dang it, when I sit and I daydream about my dream game experience, that's what it is. So again, that's just me. So what I want to know next is anyone out there, what your dream game experience would be, how feasible we think the one that I described would be, and also just for today, anything else that comes up to your mind. So I'm going to put my notes aside for a moment here. Hi notes, bye notes. Let me open up my chat window here and start my search for our fancy dancy hashtag. All right. Let's see where the comments start. All right. Oh, we're going to start today's chat comments with actually a follow-up from last week. Kabuki Kid, hello. Always a present member of our audience. It's always good to see you. Just mentions that our live play of Las Vegas, of Chaz versus the Internet, was another episode that we did. Caused Kabuki Kid to buy Las Vegas and the expansion. So I apologize to anyone's wallet that ended up buying Las Vegas because of that live play, but trust me, totally worth it. One of my favorite games of all time. What that game, Las Vegas, needs is to be built into the actual city of Las Vegas, and you're controlling the casinos and the electricity output. And no, not every game needs to become an overwrought mess. Las Vegas's charm is in its what appears to be simplicity, but there actually is quite a bit of choices and strategy that you can put into that. All right. All right, let's see here. Oh, here's one about board games here. Sorry, I think I skipped one accidentally, but Son of D mentions, I had a dream once where I had to play a game of Go on a giant sphere about the size of a house. Strange thing was, I've never played Go. Well, if you're going to play Go, then that is one of the most unique ways to have the game or any game introduced to you. So I would be really interested to see what a dream expert would have to say about that dream, because I'm sure that means something. I mean, does the giant sphere, represent the endless possibilities in a game like Go, or is it a giant Go piece, or is it just a giant sphere? We may never know, and that's okay because we're moving on anyway. Dave Fulton mentions, one of my favorite games is very divisive. It's a 4X dexterity game called Ascending Empires. I would love to design a game that scratches that itch without alienating most players. For a 4X dexterity game, that's interesting. Ascending Empires. I'm actually gonna copy that name. Ascending Empires. I'm gonna go look that up after the show. Ascending Empires. 4X, for any of those that don't know, stands for, I can never remember all the words, but it's something like explore, exterminate, extort, explore again. I don't know. But it basically is 4 words that have X in them for games where you go and you discover the areas of the map, things are revealed, you build up, and kind of what I described in a way. For my dream game, kind of a 4X game like that, where you build up things and go out and explore and conquer things and such like that. But adding a dexterity element, that is interesting. I'll have to check that out. Okay. Chicky Scares You scares me with this statement of, well, I'm designing 3 games right now. We're kind of doing so. And one of those is one of the holy grail of the board games, time travel, but a good one. Keep us posted on that. Yes, time travel does often seem to be the holy grail of board game design. A lot of people have tried it, and a lot of people that have tried those games have said that they just haven't nailed it yet. I know that Time Stories has received a lot of praise, but to be honest, Time Stories also, in my experience, from what I've heard from other people, the chatter about Time Stories, is that it's one of those games where there's a lot of hype and a big explosion of interest when it came out, and a lot of that seems to have tapered off a bit. There still are die-hard Time Story fans, and deservedly so. Time Stories is a very unique, interesting, good game, but a lot of people, I think, have settled down a little bit in their in the hype mode for Time Stories. But and with Time Stories, I've heard that Time Stories is close to scratching, hitting that time travel just right, but still not quite. It'd be neat to see a time travel game that can pull off something like the second Back to the Future movie did, where you can go and come back in the game and somehow almost have 2 game states, and you have the normal game and you leave and have like a butterfly effect where you change one thing and then you come back, and that has a ripple effect to actually change the game state somehow, the rule set almost of the base game that you started with. I have no idea how someone would pull that off, but that would be fantastic. Almost like 504, which has 504 different games in it, almost like that set on a random shuffle, and you go off and you come back and you're playing a different game of 504 that you left off on, but you come back and it's a different one of the 504 games that you have to complete. That might be a really, really interesting headache to try and do with 504. But for now, okay, let's move on to the next question here. David Troutman swims our way and says, a dream game would be one whose base game is Gateway, yet has expansions to add wonderful complexity to the game, and be Star Trek or Star Wars themed. I think that's an interesting take on it. So one where you have a simple introduction that doesn't alienate people. A lot of people can get into it. Thus a gateway game. And though then with that gateway game, you have all these expansions that kind of add complexity to it. Arkham Horror, the base game, isn't really a gateway game. But Arkham Horror is one of those games that has so many expansions and add-ons and layers. It kind of reminds me of a game that kind of might be something to use as a model for that approach. If only the base game were more of a gateway. I'd be curious, though, how that would work. Because for the expansions to add wonderful complexity to the game, which is an excellent idea, would it be changing the base game in such a way that it's no longer the same game anymore? But then again, is that even a bad thing? That might be an excellent thing for it. So, good idea there. That's one to chew on. Okay. Kabuki Kid, I think, talking about My Dream Game, mentions, I wonder if your game, the one My Dream Game I described, already exists in 504. My Dream Game might be the equivalent of playing every version of 504 all at once. It might be something along those lines, but I do need to dig into 504 a lot more. It's proving to be a tricky game to get to the table. I'm wondering if anyone else out there has any experience with 504, if they've played it, and how many of the 504 different variations they have played. Because it seems like it's one of those that everyone's like, yay, neat. No, not today. So, all right. Here we go. Oh, then also we could continue that thought with another thing you could do is just have several tables. Play a game of Suburbia, then play a game of Civilization, then play a game of Kemet. I have thought of not doing that exactly, but I thought how neat it would be to have like, I'm just going to pull names of games out of the air here. Have like a game of Suburbia or something, or Kemet. Let's say Kemet. Have a game of Kemet where is an area control. You have a map and dudes on the map, and you move your units in and attack others. But then when you attack a territory within the game of Kemet, something, actually then switch to another game, like let's just say Risk, where you use, instead of being a world map, you treat it as that individual territory. So every single fight in Kemet, every single territorial attack within Kemet it branches off, zooms into this separate game of like Risk or something like that. Maybe another game of Kemet. And so you are like zooming into that territory, and that second game becomes who resolves and wins the territory that was invaded. Totally broken idea, would take months to play, but that has something similar to what you mentioned that I have thought of trying to figure out how to make that work. But again, that falls into the camp, I think, of the utterly ridiculous, but tempting. So let's continue on. Nick mentions Chaz's dream game sounds more appropriate for a video game. You know, where's the line where you should step from cardboard to pixels? That's an excellent point, and I hate to say it, but I agree with you. The trick is, what makes it my dream game would be figuring out a way to take that scenario that, would totally work better for a computer game, because the computer can handle all that maintenance. But finding a way to streamline and make it work in a board game. Again, possible to do? Feasible? I have no idea. I probably doubt it. But that puzzle to figure out, that game within a game. Figure out, how would I make this work? That's one of the fun things to think about in this type of game design. Zach mentions, I think he mentions his dream game, which would be a racing game with randomized racetracks and worker placement to improve your racer at pit stops and set it in space. You threw me there with set it in space. Racing game with randomized racetracks, okay, easy enough, and worker placement to improve your racer at pit stops. That is an excellent idea. I like that. So you have the racing aspect, but when it comes to the pit, where you're coming in and updating and maintaining the vehicle, whether it's a race car or a race car in space or, a spaceship, whatever. When it comes, you actually have to then switch to a worker placement mode to most efficiently perform the actions during the pit stop and then go back into the race, which goes back to being a racing game. That is not, no, Formula D isn't like that. I'd be interested to see if there's anything out there that even comes close to that, because I think that is a really cool idea. Now, a lot of these ideas, might mix so many different, diverse types of games that they might be a hot mess. But I would really, I would play a prototype of that if I was at a convention and stumbled onto one. That sounds cool. Thank you, Zach. Oh, I need to refresh my comments here. All right, now I gotta find Zach's comment again. Cardboard Stacker comes by and mentions music. Oh, here we go. Music is perhaps one that is hard to implement into board games. I agree. If it does happen, either going to be the business about music or a rhythm game, but not an actual music game. Yeah, I think that music is even a tougher nut to crack than time travel. And why is it? What is it about music that makes it so difficult for a board game experience? I mean, music is very mathematical in its constructs, and board games very, I'd say the majority almost have a very mathematical aspect to them, and scoring and this and efficiency and figuring out thing and timing and all that. It seems like board games and music would be a lot closer related and easier to mesh than they really are. But yeah, that's a really an interesting topic, theme, a really interesting theme that I honestly think would make an interesting board game, but I don't know why it is such a tough nut to crack. But yes, music, that would be an excellent one to see. Daniel didn't add the hashtag, but I did scroll right past this as I was going to the next comment, who mentioned his dream game would be a 4X board game that each player uses their phones to secretly discuss diplomacy. Oh yeah, that type of secret diplomacy discussion in a closed environment, like with a phone, IMing each other. Oh yeah. Before phones we used just notes, but playing RPGs have done that same thing, which can be really neat because if the players can only see and hear what they actually can see and hear, and there is a private discussion, could really help amp up the paranoia. If there's one thing I'm for in a board game, it's the excuse for more paranoia. So, okay, but let's get on to the next actual comment here from Daniel, who mentions, I find that drafting as a mechanic is underutilized. It keeps downtime pretty low. I don't know about underutilized, but it's fair enough. I think that there are more games that could utilize drafting, definitely. So yeah, there you go. And I think what I've found too, there's actually been some games that we've experimented with adding drafting to. And one example I can think of is Dice Town. Dice City. Not the poker one. Dice City, the Machikoro-like one. It's right there. Yeah. Dice City. When we played, my wife and I played Dice City a couple of times, and we experimented with actually drafting the first hands and doing some other things with that. Actually starting with a set of cards in your hand and such. And it was an interesting twist on the game. So I think that drafting is something that I think actually sometimes can improve a game that has that capability, but it's not in the original rule set. So anyway, drafting is definitely a mechanism that I think could be used more often, whether people realize it or not, the designers realize it or not. Anyway, let's see. David Troutman provides a little more follow-up on his gateway game with lots of expansions idea. He mentions, I'm still trying to get people I know into board games. So my dream game would have to have the base set be the gateway. Makes sense, because if you come in every game is going to be too complex for someone. So finding a nice equilibrium there in game design, I think is really important. Some games, what they want to be, and they just have to be what they are. Some games are going to be complex and big because they have to be, and that's fine. But a lot of times I found that, especially with kind of the modern board game market with so many to choose from, finding that nice equilibrium to streamlining it versus complexity, and having add-ons and expansions, even if they are in the base game, but they're saying, hey, play the normal game first, then introduce these. That seems to be a really good idea for modern board game design. That seems to have a good reception. All right. High Five Ryan. Oh, that's your name. That's not a command. Okay. High Five Ryan states, one of my dream games to build would be to build a modular game. A board game that you can assemble in pieces and create separate but solid games for one player all the way to 8. Following that idea, he continues, each piece would have LCD screens allowing you to change each piece to a certain game. It would allow an ever-changing game with downloadable updates with new games. That reminds me of something I saw on Kickstarter within the last 6 months. It was one of those things that was, didn't strike my fancy enough for me to bookmark it or anything, but the LCD screens that change and you can download different modules into the game, Reminds me of something I saw, a board game design concept I saw on Kickstarter. I have no idea whatever happened to it. But anyway, the point is that, high five, Ryan, that it sounds like you're not the only person to have had that idea. And in fact, it reminds me also way back 10 years ago or so, before LCD monitors and especially touchscreens, before they became the norm and everything was still CRT and everything, my gaming friends and I used to just daydream and have hour-long discussions about the ultimate gaming table, which was actually a big touchscreen LCD screen where you would just play the board game on the table-sized screen. And actually, that's not that far-fetched anymore. So, with giant screens and touchscreen capability, so the LCDs for game pieces that you can download contents for, 10 years from now, that might not be that far-fetched. So it'll be interesting to see what develops. Thank you for contributing that neato idea. Daniel mentions, my dream game would be a 4X board game that each player uses their phone to secretly discuss diplomacy. And this time it has a hashtag, so it showed up. So I'm glad I'm glad I took the time to read the previous one because you actually did want to say it out loud. So there we go. In a way, we're caught up now. All right, so we'll continue on to the next statement from Samuel. Samuel mentions, my dream game would be a similar type of game as Eldritch Horror, but instead of the Lovecraft theme, there would be a Philip K. Dick theme. I would love to be dealing with false reality / drugs / replicants, etc. That's an interesting theme. The false reality / drugs and replicants, what's real. Trying to think of a game that has a similar theme, and I'm doing a horrible job of it. The only thing that I can think of that comes close with the replicants and stuff, but it's kind of a different feel to it, is the RPG called Paranoia, which is it's this post-apocalyptic type of world set way in the future where this well-meaning but insane computer controls the world and is trying to protect you, you think. But the computer was developed during the Cold War, so it has this built-in irrational fear of communists and terror and stuff like that. So everybody in the game has a series of clones. That's just a current technology. You have like a 6-pack of clones. So you play the game, and the computer is so paranoid and controls everything that if you are suspected of treason in any way due to being a communist or trying to work against the computer or just anything, real or not, imagined or real, the computer will have you destroyed. And one of your clones will take over. So the premise of the game is to complete these missions while still having at least one of your clone lives left to actually complete the missions alive. And everyone's trying to double cross each other. It's a lot more tongue-in-cheek than the false reality / drugs / replicants, but the Paranoia universe, it's an RPG, not a board game too, but that universe might be something that can help scratch that itch, or at least be something that would be neat to see ported over to a board game actually too. So anyway, that's that also says that there might actually be a market for that type of theme, which you're right, I haven't seen that theme a lot, but I think that would be really interesting to see something that utilizes it. Gainier says, game I've been tossing around in my head is a civ building, deck building game. The deck represents the people in your civilization, and going through your deck represents your civ going through a generation. Interesting. So each time you go through the deck, like I'm going to just use Dominion as an example, because Dominion, you start with a deck of 10 cards, you add in more, but you're going to run out of those 10 cards and then take your discard pile, reshuffle, and recreate your deck multiple times throughout the game, quite frequently, every 2 to 3 turns or more. So it'd be interesting if you meant that you're going through the different generations of your civilization that quickly, every couple of turns. That is a really interesting concept. I like that. It'd be interesting to see how the generations if their culture, their technology, and everything, their resources available, if that would morph and change just by going through your deck as the generations change, or if it would take more to it. Just simply going through your deck allow time to pass where new discoveries are made, or do you actually have to play cards to make that happen? That could be really neat give and take in something like that. So that would be, again, is also a really neat concept there. Very cool. Okay, Jay Booth mentions, my dream game is a Star Wars version of Puerto Rico and Power Grid's... let me start over. My dream game is a Star Wars version of Puerto Rico and Power Grid's Baby, where players collectively build the Death Star and build the rooms and modules that help build the station. The scoring rounds are called Vader phases, where Vader comes and chokes the people who aren't performing well enough. All I can say is that just reading that synopsis, this game needs to be made right now. You had me at the Puerto Rico Power Grid Baby and hooked me with building the Death Star. But having the Vader phases where the lowest performing workers are choked, force choked, that's just frosting on the cake. That c'est magnifique. That is a wonder of imagination engineering right there. Yeah, someone build this game right now. That's awesome. Okay. Wang mentions, mine will be a game that has game mechanisms like that from games like Evolution and Star Wars Rebellion, but gameplay within 30 minutes. Realistic minis that move by themselves on voice command. Oh, wait a minute, wasn't expecting that in your comment. Realistic minis that move by themselves on voice command. Well, that is innovative. Now, would they be on little wheels, or would they be little animatronics, like little? Sorry, you just blew my mind, because if they're actual little animatronics that have the ability to move, that technology that you described after you make your cross between Evolution and Star Wars Rebellion, you need to take that technology you patent for that game and apply it to BattleTech. We need mechs for BattleTech. BattleTech is an RPG. What is it with RPGs today? BattleTech is an RPG game and also a minis game set in like the 30th century or something like that, where you have these 3-story tall, fully weaponized, called mechs, big robots that people are driving around the countryside. And for those big robots or mechs to be actually mechanized, to be able to walk around the board, that's also something that we need right now, please. Yes. Also, in BattleTech, you have to manage the heat. All the weapons you use and running and using your little jump jets and stuff for your robot, it all generates real heat. That's one of the main things to manage in BattleTech is your heat of your mech. You can't let it overheat or it'll shut down until it cools down or explode. So if the minis, now OSHA would never approve this or anything, but if the minis actually got hot and had little temperature gauges on them, maybe even were made of a material, heat-sensitive, temperature-sensitive material that changed color as they got hotter, oh yeah. So fully fully movable on their own little mechs that actually heated up and changed color to let you know. That's what we need for BattleTech next generation. Sorry, I seem to have gone on a little bit of a tangent there with BattleTech, so I'll get back to the actual statements here, and we'll continue to the next question. Brandon mentions, okay, so Chaz, based on what I described as my Chaz's dream game, what are your thoughts on the upcoming Mega Civilization? I believe, I want to play it so bad. I don't have a copy of it or anything, though. A friend of mine, though, a fellow vlogger, video podcast guy, he has, I think he obtained a copy of Mega Civilization just before BGGCon last year. Or he was going to, or what. Anyway, in our discussions before BGGCon, he was going to bring it, but he ended up leaving it behind and he didn't bring it to BGGCon because his thought was, why do I want to play Mega Civilization and basically eat up an entire day or more of my time at BGGCon playing one game when I could play all these other games. Like, fair enough. I can't argue with that. But Mega Civilization is just this huge, huge civ building game. I mean, we're taking, it's supposed to take up like a 10-foot wide table. And it's, I think, the closest thing I've ever heard of that comes to my dream game. But I'm not sure how many of my aspects of my dream game are in it. But yes, Mega Civilization is something that definitely piques my interest. But it's one of those, I have no idea when I would be able to find enough people who all have enough time to play it. But yes, I dig it. I totally want to find out more about that one. So that's Mega Civilization. I thought it was out already, so I might be wrong. Maybe it was just maybe it's coming out soon. Sasha mentions, if it has to be a board game, yes, it does. I changed my mind. No, it doesn't. Okay, but if it has to be a board game, I would go for a deck building game. But to be honest, I'd rather create my own RPG settings and rules system. I think it's fair enough. That's a fair point. I think every gamer at some point in their life has, even if they didn't produce any of the actual materials for it, has dabbled with thinking of what their ultimate RPG game would be as well. I know in actually some of my favorite gaming experiences from high school and early college were playing a homemade RPG game with my friends that we played. And yeah, so I think that a homemade RPG system is definitely qualifies for this discussion. Oddly enough, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but it always seems to me that even with so many board games out there, it's easier to create a unique board game theme and mechanisms than it is for RPG. It seems, at least just in my experience, it seems like every RPG theme and such that almost all of them that I've come up with already exist. You know, there is a couple that I actually, the one that we played in high school is different, which I'll get into a different day. But it does seem like it's more difficult to come up with a unique RPG theme. But correct me if I am wrong. Okay. Let's move on to the next hashtag here. Oh no, my chat window jumped. It's funny, YouTube chat window has not seemed to be jumping as frequently as it used to, but it just did. Okay, board game. Oh, we found our spot. And our spot is with Trevin, who is providing with us the definition of 4X. Thank you, Trevin. 4X, according to Trevin, stands for explore, expand, exterminate, and exploit. That's what it is. Not extort, exploit. Thank you. So yes, explore, expand, exterminate, exploit. And I must say, I'm surprised how many 4X fans there are in this chat. I wonder if it's just due to the Dice Tower audience being more of a board game centric audience that's really into board games, and maybe that lends to more people that are into 4X games. But it seems like there has been a lot of love for 4X games here in the chat, which is awesome. Orioles fan joins us again to mention, my dream game would be one that puts you in the place of an umpire. So that way you can see all they go through, calling balls as strikes, safes, and outs. And last but not least, dealing with players and coaches. Oh, an umpire. Now that is truly unique. I've never heard of that in a board game. So there we go. If anyone the next time that someone develops a generic fantasy or zombie game, we need to compile this list and email it to them of all these other amazing themes and mechanisms that are being mentioned in the chat. And then this has just been, 25 minutes of discussion. There's all these amazing unique themes. So the life of an umpire in a baseball game. Very cool. Okay, let's continue to Jay Booth, who mentions, I'm also thinking of a time travel game that would use nested planetary gears to let workers move back to previous spots. It would be themed as cats who travel back in time when they sleep. Okay, the nested planetary gears was cool enough, but time traveling Cats who time travel backwards while they sleep. There now you got my curiosity. You got my interest there. Take this and please run with it, because I would love to play a time traveling comatose cat in a game. That's fantastic. Okay, let's continue on. Kabuki Kid mentions about the time travel game. The time travel game that you are describing, Chaz, would need to be a PC game. Perhaps. But as I said with the unfeasible dream game that I mentioned, I challenge that. Nay, the trick is to find out how to make it work within a board game scenario. How would we make these complex, maintenance-driven things work in a board game? So I defy you, Kabuki Kid. I defy you that my time travel description would have to be a PC game. No, we could make it work. Our collective development, creativity in the board game community, we could make it work. We just haven't figured it out yet. Side note, I've always wanted to build a time machine, but I know that it would never work because I've told myself that the first thing that I would do if I built a time machine is I would come back in time and tell myself that it worked to encourage me to do it. And it's never happened. Never run into myself encouraging me. So I know I'm never going to be able to pull it off. Anyway, let's continue with the comments. Gainer mentions again, also on the Civ theme, I'd like a series of games that zoom in on particular civs like Rome, Arabia, etc. Then after a bunch are out, make a big connector that allows you to play them all together. Ooh, that's an interesting idea. Kind of, not completely, but kind of reminds me of the Chronicles series that Rob Davio is starting. With Chronicles Origins was a game that we demoed at BGGCon last November, which is set in the Stone Age, where you players all have they're all playing the part of the same civilization, this clan in the Stone Age, and you play. It's kind of a little bit like Above and Below, so it's a little bit story driven. You have choices to make with different stories and scenarios, almost a choose your own adventure type story. And also some resource management and some backstabbing depending on who you play it with. But after you play the Stone Age scenarios, you flip the board over and it's the Bronze Age or something. And you take the same clan and you continue through the Bronze Age. So you kind of have zoomed in on this one society as they grow. And there will be future installments. There'll be like Chronicles, the Silver Age and the Iron Age and the Modern Age. I don't know where they're going with it. But through all this series of games, you're going to take this same society that you've started and continue them through all these games. So in a way that's zooming in on one, but it's not quite what you described, but it reminded me it's possibly the closest thing that we have coming up in the board game world currently. But anyway, so yes, I think that there's potential for there, obviously, since similar things kind of are being experimented with too. But let's continue on to Thomas, who mentions, my dream game would be a gangster or mob theme, maybe with the Warriors intellectual property from the 80s movie. Something with illegal ops, territory claiming, and defenses, tech trees, etc. Interesting. The Warriors movie from the 80s. I can see that. I could see gangster or mob theme. I could see that working. That's a really interesting IP, though, to bring up, too. I wonder if whoever is in control of that IP currently would be open to having it adapted to a board game. That would be very cool to see. Chicky scares me again with the following. Oh, someone's boiling water. I don't know if you guys can hear that, but there's a whistle blowing. Either that or someone's mech got really, really hot and is overheat. That's when the mechs get hot and they overheat. We need little kettle whistles to whistle like that, if you can hear it. Okay, but back to the comments. Chicky Scares You mentions, the time travel game that I'm doing is based on 5 different time lapses, and everything that you do in the past creates ripple effects and paradoxes in the time periods after it. It's hard to explain. Well, it's time travel. Of course, it's difficult to explain. I'm also trying to do a horror game that actually will scare the heck out of players as a good video game would. One that creates the same ambiance of fear created when playing with a Ouija board. I think that horror and scary board games are really difficult to pull off successfully because so much of instilling fear depends on where and who you play it with. You can have the scariest game in the world, but the people you play it with, if they're not into it and they're not in the mood, it's not going to work. So being able to pull that off would be a really good trick. And as for the time travel paradoxes and stuff, oh yeah, that's really the trick of a time travel game. And I don't know how that would be pulled off successfully, but I really do think that is the hat trick. If the paradoxes and the ripple effects and the time lapses and stuff could be pulled off. Kabuki Kid mentions that she respects the 504 idea and innovation, but is not really into the gameplay. I think it needs more of a theme. That seems to be the general consensus with 504. And I think with 504, I think the designer was kind of, I can't speak for Friedman Freese or anything, but it seems to me that it was one of those things where they really wanted to see it happen. I want to make this, I want to see if I can pull it off almost as an experiment. Like that's my opinion of it. And I think from that design experiment perspective, 504 is just amazing. But the only downside to 504 is a comment I've heard is after playing any random game in 504, it's like, okay, that's okay. But then they've asked the question, well, that game you just played of 504, if it was a standalone game that was not 504, would you buy it? It's like, oh, I probably didn't like it enough to buy it on its own. And there's the problem with 504. But still, I have great, magnificent respect for 504, and I'm glad I own a copy of it. And anyone interested in game design or just experimentation, sandbox stuff, I highly recommend 504. Just because it has all of those opportunities and it has pulled off that type of scenario better than anything that I've ever seen ever before. Wow, we're already down to just 8 minutes left. This has just flown by, so I'm going to continue going through as many comments as possible. The first one being from Daniel, who says, apologizes for his English. It's no problem. I live in America, and my English probably stinks worse than C. Okay, practical example. But let's continue with your statement. Like a beginner designer, I make the games I dream. I try to test with all I imagine, but in the actuality, usually the expectations of gameplay aren't going to match with the mechanics. Sorry, see, I think I butchered your statement there a little bit more than you even thought I would there. Sorry. Try to test with everything that you can imagine. So every mechanism, every theme, everything that you can think of, but in the actuality, you usually run into the case where the expectations of gameplay don't match with the mechanics. That's from someone who's dabbled in game design and such, you know, just from enjoying games growing up and everything. I can totally see that. I have had, in I'd say early 2000s, before Dominion was out, I developed a game I just only played it with my wife a couple of times, but I developed a game that if I had known what I know now, would have developed into a deck building game. But deck building games didn't exist back then. And I'm not smart enough to have come up with the concept of deck building games on my own. So it was like handicapped, just a horrible, partial deck building game. All of the deck building concepts weren't there. So it was like half baked. But developed this, I spent a couple months working on it, and we played it, I had on paper, all the rules and everything made sense. It was balanced. And I sat down and my wife and I played it a couple times, and we played it and it was functional. And after each game, we looked up at each other and like, wow, that game worked. Wasn't fun at all, but it worked. And it got put back on the drawing shelf, and it's never really come off since then. But anyway, there's lots of times where a game can look great on paper and the rules can sound great and the mechanisms can sound great. But putting it all together and playing it and having it be fun, that is definitely a different potato. There's a lot more to it than that. And it takes some tweaking and some work, which is why feedback and playtesting is so important all the time. Well, let's move on for now with the time that we have left. Bob mentions, my dream game would be one where the real time is created for the players so they can play more games. Wait. My dream game would be one where real time is created for the player. Oh, not a game in real time. No, silly host. No, My dream game would be where real time is created for the players to have in real life so they can play more games. When you're ready to play test a prototype of that, Bob, let me know, because anything that can be done to create some more time would be greatly appreciated. So this is when I expect myself to walk into the room and tell me that the time machine worked. But it never happens. Oh, okay. Cardboard Stacker mentions again, I like a game about tea making. And I do mean tea in the Eastern sense. Yunnan, I was just about to mention, just yesterday someone mentioned Yunnan to me. Argentum Verlag is the closest, because I believe Yunnan is about tea making, is the closest, but it's more like a Euro trading game. I want it to be kept simple, accessible, but deep. Simple, accessible, but deep. I think last couple episodes ago, I talked about how when my family, my wife and I are looking for something to eat for dinner, and we don't know what to eat, we have the rule of you can choose fast, cheap, or good, but you can only choose two. The simple, accessible, but deep, I'm wondering if that might fall into that rule of pick any two. Simple, accessible, deep. Can you only have two? Can you ever have all three in a game? Is it too subjective? Okay. And Guy mentions again about combining games. You should try chess boxing. Oh, I think I've heard of that. That is where, and this is a real thing, and I think we will stop after this one, because we're out of time. But combining chess boxing, I believe, is a real thing where players will play several minutes of chess, and then they will pause the game, put on boxing gloves, and then have a boxing match and punch the crap out of each other for a round of boxing. They take off the gloves after the bell rings, go down and continue their game of chess, and go back and forth, until either someone achieves checkmate or a waking coma. I don't know, a knockout. But I guess that should demonstrate, for those of us working on time travel games and trying to work out the wrinkles in those and how you combine those concepts and mechanisms and make them work, chess boxing, I think, should be lauded as the example of there is a way. Whether your game is a super complex combination of Sid Meier's Civilization and SimCity and Kemet, or some weird deck building game that's only half baked, or something about time traveling cats, or whatever your game concept is, chess boxing, we should all keep that as our example, that anything is possible when it comes to gaming. Any concepts, we can find a way to combine those, and there is a way to mesh them and make them work. So with all of our dream game designs, keep chess boxing in mind, because if they can make that work, we can make anything work. So on that note, I'm going to wrap up, and then I'm sorry there's still about a third more of the comments that we didn't get to, but we are out of time. This was a fantastic discussion, and I want to thank everybody for joining me on this episode of The Metagame. This type of episode is what this series is all about. And until our next episode, for more board game news and reviews and commentary and videos and podcasts, be sure to subscribe over here. Subscribe to both the Dice Tower and the Paradise YouTube channels, and join us on our Facebook pages and our Twitter feeds and everything, so we can continue the discussion about this and other board game related topics. But until we get to all of that, for now, I have been Chaz Marler, along with the YouTube chat area, and together we have been playing The Metagame. Talk to you again soon.